The forest breathed in the dark, its ancient trees groaning under the weight of the night. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and iron, the promise of a kill hanging like a curse. Beneath the swollen crimson moon, Kieran moved like a shadow given teeth, his massive frame cutting through the underbrush with predatory silence. He was Alpha, a beast carved from fury and moonlight, his golden eyes burning with the fire of the hunt. His pack moved behind him, a chorus of snarls and snapping jaws, their fur bristling with anticipation. Prey had been scarce, and the hunger in their bellies was a living thing, gnawing at their patience. But tonight, the forest would feed them. Tonight, blood would spill. Then, a scent. Foreign, intoxicating. Kieran's nostrils flared, his hackles rising. It was not deer, not rabbit, not anything that belonged in these woods. It was something older, darker, something that should not be here. His growl ripped through the silence, and the pack still behind him, sensing the shift in their leader. His claws flexed, digging into the earth as he followed the trail, his pulse a drumbeat in his veins. The scent grew stronger, cold jasmine and something metallic, like a blade left in snow. Then he saw her, perched on a gnarled branch, draped in moonlight like a queen of the damned. Valeria watched him with eyes like liquid silver. Her lips were stained dark, her fangs just barely visible behind the smirk she wore. She was elegance carved from nightmares, her pale skin glowing against the black silk of her dress. The werewolves beneath her tensed, their growls rising in warning, but Kieran did not move, did not blink. His beast roared inside him, not in fury, but in something far more dangerous, recognition. She tilted her head, her voice a whisper that slithered through the trees. "Lost, little wolf." The pack snarled, but Kieran silenced them with a flick of his hand. His eyes never left hers. "This is my territory," he rumbled, his voice rough with the edge of his wolf. She laughed, the sound like shattering glass. Territories change. Kings fall. With a grace that defied nature, she dropped from the branch, landing soundlessly before him. The air between them crackled, alive with something neither could name. Kieran's muscles coiled, ready to strike, but she did not attack. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that her scent wrapped around him, ice and blood and something sweet, something that made his teeth ache. "You smell like hunger," she murmured, her fingers brushing the air near his jaw. Not touching, not yet, like a beast who's forgotten what it means to be full. His breath hitched. No one had ever dared to speak to him like this. No one had ever looked at him and seen something more than the monster. The pack growled, their patience snapping. One lunged. Valeria moved faster than sight. One moment she was before Kieran. The next, she had the wolf pinned beneath her, her fingers curled around his throat. Her fangs gleamed in the moonlight, her eyes burning with cold fire. Kieran was on her in an instant, his claws at her ribs, his snarl vibrating through his chest. "Release him." She glanced at him, amused. Or what? He could kill her. He knew he could. His strength was unmatched, his fury legendary, but something in her gaze held him. Something that whispered of games yet to be played, of battles that would ruin them both. Slowly, she released the wolf, her fingers trailing along his fur before she stood. "You're interesting," she mused, stepping back into the shadows. "Perhaps I'll let you live a little longer." Then she was gone, leaving only the echo of her laughter and the scent of frost-kissed roses. The pack bristled, their eyes flashing with unease. But Kieran did not move. His blood was on fire, his beast howling inside him, not in rage, but in something far worse want. She had looked at him like he was more than a beast. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The next night, the forest was too quiet. No rustle of prey, no whisper of wind through the leaves, just the heavy silence that came before a storm. Kieran stood at the edge of the trees, his golden eyes scanning the darkness. His pack had begged him not to come, had snarled warnings of traps and treachery. But the memory of her, Valeria, with her silver eyes and mocking smile, had haunted him like a fever dream. He needed to see her again. The moment his paws crossed into vampire territory, the air changed. Colder, sharper. The scent of old blood and crushed roses clung to the bark of the trees, a warning to any creature with sense enough to flee. But Kieran was not afraid. He was Alpha, and tonight he was hunting something far more dangerous than prey. A whisper of silk against bark. He turned, his muscles tensing. She was there, perched on a low-hanging branch like a bird of prey, her legs swinging idly. The moonlight painted her in shades of ivory and shadow, making her seem more ghost than flesh. Her lips curled as she watched him, amused. "Back so soon, little wolf?" His hackles rose, but not in anger. Something deeper, darker, coiled in his gut. "You do I would be." She tilted her head, studying him with those unnerving eyes. "Hopeful, are we?" He bared his teeth, not in threat, but in something closer to a challenge. Curious. With a laugh like shattering ice, she dropped from the branch, landing soundlessly before him. This close, he could see the delicate points of her fangs, the way of her pulse, slow and steady, thrummed beneath her pale throat. She smelled like winter and something sweet, something that made his mouth water. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, stepping closer. Her fingers trailed along the edge of his fur, not quite touching, but close enough to make his breath catch. "My kind doesn't take kindly to trespassers." He held his ground, his voice a low growl. "Then why haven't you killed me yet?" Her smile was a blade wrapped in silk. "Where's the fun in that?" In a flash, she was behind him, her breath cool against his ear. "You're fast for a wolf," she mused, "but not fast enough." He snarled, spinning to face her, but she was already gone, her laughter drifting from the trees above. A game. She was playing with him. The beast inside him roared, torn between fury and fascination. He lunged, his claws slicing through the air where she had been. But she danced just out of reach, always a step ahead. "You're predictable," she teased, appearing at his side. Her fingers brushed his shoulder, light as a moth's wing, before she vanished again. His chest heaved, his blood burning. She was toying with him, and worse, he was letting her. With a growl, he stopped chasing. Instead, he stood still, his ears pricked, his nostrils flaring. He could hear the faint rustle of her dress, the whisper of her breath. There. He moved like lightning, his body slamming into hers, pinning her against the rough bark of an ancient oak. Her eyes widened, just for a second, surprise flickering across her face before it melted back into amusement. "Clever," she purred, her fangs glinting. His claws dug into the wood on either side of her head, caging her in. She didn't struggle, didn't even look afraid. Instead, she leaned closer, her lips nearly brushing his muzzle. "What now, Alpha?" Her voice was a challenge, a dare. His breath came ragged, his heart pounding. He could kill her. He should kill her. But the scent of her, cold and sweet and deadly, filled his lungs, and something inside him ached. Without thinking, he spoke, his voice rough. "You look beautiful today." For the first time, her mask slipped, her breath hitched, her silver eyes flickering with something raw, something vulnerable. No one had ever called her beautiful, not when they knew what she was. She recovered quickly, her smirk returning. Flattery won't. 3 nights passed before Kieran returned. 3 nights of pacing, of snarling at his pack when they questioned him, of lying beneath the moon with his claws digging into the earth, trying to tear out the hunger that had nothing to do with blood or meat. It was madness. She was vampire, enemy, death wrapped in silk. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of the blackened river that marked the boundary between their worlds, his fur bristling with anticipation. The air smelled like damp stone and old magic, the water rushing dark and cold beneath him. He didn't call for her, didn't need to. She was already there. Valeria stood on the opposite bank, her pale dress rippling like smoke in the wind. The moonlight turned her into something unreal, a specter, a dream. Her lips curved when she saw him, slow and knowing. "I wondered if you'd come back," she murmured, her voice carrying across the water like a secret. Kieran's chest tightened. "You knew I would." She tilted her head, studying him, hoping for another chase. No, the word came out rougher than he intended. He didn't move, didn't cross the water. This was as close as they could be without breaking the unspoken rules. For a long moment, neither spoke. The river hissed between them, a living thing. Then Valeria lifted her skirts and stepped onto the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. Kieran's breath caught. She walked toward him, her bare feet barely disturbing the current, her eyes never leaving his. When she reached the middle of the river, she stopped, her smile sharpening. "Come to me, wolf." A challenge, a test. His claws flexed. He could turn away, should turn away. Instead, he stepped into the water. The cold bit into his fur, his muscles coiling as the current tugged at him. But he didn't falter. Step by step, he closed the distance between them, his gaze locked on hers. Valeria didn't move, didn't blink. When he was close enough to touch, she reached out, her fingers hovering just above his muzzle. "You're shivering," she observed. He wasn't, but his body burned all the same. Her touch was colder than the river when it finally landed, her fingertips tracing the curve of his jaw. He could feel the sharp points of her nails, the lethal strength in her delicate hands. One wrong move, and she could rip out his throat. He didn't care. "Why did you come back?" she asked softly. His answer was a growl. "You know why." Her thumb brushed the edge of his lip, where his fangs threatened to peek through. "Say it." The beast in him snarled, torn between pride and need. But the way she looked at him, like she already knew, like she wanted to hear it, undid him. "I couldn't stay away." Her breath hitched, just slightly. Then she leaned in, her lips brushing the shell of his ear. "Good." The words sent fire through his veins. Then she vanished into the trees, leaving him standing in the river, his pulse roaring in his ears. He didn't realize he was smiling until his fangs cut into his own lip. The old cathedral. The Deadlands were exactly what they sounded like, a graveyard of crumbling stone and forgotten bones, where the wind howled through skeletal trees. The cathedral stood at its heart, its spire broken. The cathedral ruins hummed with ancient energy, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and something darker, something like old magic, like secrets buried too deep to stay forgotten. Kieran stood motionless, his golden eyes locked on Valeria as she circled him, her steps slow, deliberate. The moonlight painted her in shades of bone and shadow, turning her into something between a woman and a wraith. Her fingers trailed along the broken altar. Dawn was a threat on the horizon. Valeria could feel it in her bones, the creeping, searing promise of sunlight that would force her into hiding. But here, in the belly of the ruined cathedral, with Kieran's warmth pressed against her, she couldn't bring herself to move. His breath was steady against her throat, his claws tracing idle patterns along her ribs. She should have been repulsed, should have torn his throat out for daring to touch her like this. Instead, she arched into his touch. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. She huffed, turning her head to look at him. The moonlight caught the gold in his eyes, turning them into something molten. "Vampires don't sleep," she reminded him. He grinned, all teeth. "Then what are we doing?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because this, lying tangled in the remains of their clothes, his heartbeat steady beneath her palm, was something she had no name for. Outside, the wind howled through the broken stained glass, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something familiar. Valeria went rigid. Kieran felt it too. In an instant, he was on his feet, his body tense for a fight. "What is it?" "Blood," she whispered. "Old blood." Then the first shadow moved at the edge of the ruins. The siege. They came like ghosts, figures draped in black, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their steps silent. Vampires, her kind. Valeria was on her feet in a heartbeat, her fangs bared. "Sister," she greeted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're far from home." The lead figure stepped forward, pushing back her hood to reveal a face as pale and perfect as Valeria's own. "We could say the same," she purred. "Consorting with beasts now, are we?" Kieran's growl shook the stones beneath their feet. The vampire's gaze flicked at him, her lip curling. "Cute. Does it do tricks?" Valeria moved before Kieran could, her hand snapping out to grip her sister's throat. "Speak again," she hissed, "and I'll feed you your own tongue." The other vampires hissed, their bodies coiling like snakes ready to strike. Then a howl. Not Kieran's, not any wolf Valeria had ever heard. The vampires froze. Kieran's eyes widened. "No," he breathed. The first werewolf lunged from the darkness, its fur matted with blood, its eyes wild. Then another, and another. Kieran's pack, but not here for him. Here for her. The choice. Chaos erupted. Vampires and werewolves clashed in a whirl of fangs and claws, the air thick with snarls and the metallic tang of blood. Valeria moved like lightning, tearing through fur and flesh with lethal precision. But there were too many. A wolf caught her arm, its teeth sinking deep. She screamed, ripping free, only to be slammed into the wall by another. Valeria? Kieran's roar cut through the noise. He barreled through the fight, his body a weapon, his claws slick with blood. When he reached her, he didn't hesitate. He turned on his own pack, his teeth bared. Traitor, one of the wolves snarled. Kieran didn't flinch. Leave, he growled, or die. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the largest wolf, an alpha like Kieran, stepped forward. You choose her over your own blood? Kieran's answer was simple, yes. The fight that followed was brutal. Kieran was strong, but he was outnumbered. Valeria watched, her chest tight, as his body was torn into by claws and teeth, his blood painting the stones red. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the first sliver of sunlight cut through the ruins. The vampires screamed, scrambling for cover. The wolves hesitated, their instincts warring with their rage. Valeria didn't hesitate. She lunged for Kieran, her arms wrapping around him as she dragged him into the deepest shadows of the cathedral. His body was heavy, his breathing ragged. Fool, she whispered, her hands trembling as they pressed against his wounds. Stupid, reckless. He caught her wrist, his grip weak but steady. Worth it, he rasped. Her vision blurred. No, she wouldn't. Valeria, Kieran murmured, his thumb brushing her cheek. It came away wet. She was crying. Vampires didn't cry. Vampires didn't care. But she did. I can save you, she whispered, her voice breaking. But you have to trust me. Kieran's lips curved just slightly, always. Then she struck, her fangs sinking into his throat, not to kill, but to give. Her venom burned through his veins, her power stitching his flesh back together. When she pulled away, his eyes were wild, his body shuddering with the force of her magic. What did you do? He gasped. Valeria pressed her forehead to his, her breath ragged. I bound you to me, she admitted. Now you're mine. Kieran's laugh was rough, pained. I already was. Outside, the howls began again. They were coming. And this time, there was no running. The cathedral ruins no longer offered sanctuary. Shadows slithered between the crumbling pillars, alive with the whispers of approaching enemies. The scent of blood and wet fur clung to the air, thick enough to taste. Kieran stood with his back against the cold stone, his body still humming with the aftereffects of Valeria's venom. His wounds had closed, but something deeper had been torn open, something primal. He could feel her power inside him now, a dark thread woven through his veins. It should have repulsed him. Instead, it felt like coming home. Valeria's fingers curled around his wrist, her touch icy against his fevered skin. They're coming, she murmured, her silver eyes reflecting the first bloody light of dawn. He didn't need to ask who. The snarls echoing through the ruins said enough. His pack, her sisters, all of them united in one purpose, to destroy this blasphemy they created. Kieran bared his teeth. Let them. Valeria's lips curved, but there was no amusement in it. Only hunger, only fury. You'll die. We'll die together then. For a heartbeat, she just looked at him, her gaze stripping him bare. Then she leaned in, her fangs grazing his bottom lip, not quite biting. No, she whispered. We'll burn this world down first. Outside, the howls grew louder. The blood eclipsed. They met their enemies in the cathedral's shattered heart, where the last of the moonlight bled through the broken stained glass. Kieran fought like a demon unleashed, his claws rending flesh, his snarls shaking the stones. Valeria moved beside him, a whirlwind of teeth and silk, her laughter sharp as the dagger she wielded. But there were too many. A wolf slammed into Kieran, its jaws closing around his shoulder. He roared, twisting to slam it into the ground, only for a vampire to strike from the shadows, her nails raking down his back. Valeria screamed his name. He turned just in time to see her fall beneath the tide of fur and fangs. Something inside him snapped. The shift came like a storm, bones cracking, flesh reforming, his body growing larger, darker, until what stood in the ruins was no longer wolf or man, but something in between, something more. The attackers faltered. Valeria stared up at him, her lips parted in shock. Kieran? Then the sky caught fire. Above them, the moon began to bleed, its silver light drowning in crimson. The stained glass shadows stretched long and twisted across the floor, the air itself vibrating with a sound like 1,000 whispering voices. The blood eclipse had begun. The awakening. Kieran's body burned. Valeria staggered to her feet, her hand pressed to a wound at her side. The other vampires were backing away now, their eyes wide with something Kieran had never seen in them before: fear. "It's a sign," one whispered. "An abomination," hissed another. Valeria's laugh was wild, unhinged. "No," she breathed. "It's a crown." She reached for Kieran, her fingers trembling as they brushed his transformed face. Where her skin met his, sparks danced, gold and silver, fire and ice. The remaining wolves and vampires hesitated, caught between rage and terror. Then the largest wolf, Kieran's former alpha, lunged. Valeria moved faster. Her hand snapped out, catching the wolf midair, her fingers sinking into his fur. For a heartbeat, she held it there, suspended. Then, with a smile that showed every one of her fangs, she squeezed. The wolf's spine snapped like dry kindling. Silence. Valeria dropped the corpse, her chest heaving. "Anyone else?" she purred. No one moved. Kieran stepped forward, his new form towering over them all. When he spoke, his voice was a growl layered with something deeper, something other. "Run." They ran. The Covenant. Dawn came, but the eclipse lingered, painting the world in shades of rust and shadow. Kieran and Valeria stood amidst the carnage, their bodies bruised but unbroken. Valeria turned to him, her fingers tracing the new ridges of his transformed body. "What are we now?" she asked softly. Kieran caught her hand, pressing it over his heart. "Whatever we want to be." Her smile was slow, dangerous. "I want to be everything." Beneath their feet, the earth trembled. Somewhere in the dark places of the world, the old gods stirred, and for the first time in centuries, they listened. The world smelled like blood and burning. Kieran stood at the edge of the ruined cathedral, his transformed body still humming with power. The eclipse hung heavy above them, staining the sky the color of a fresh wound. Beside him, Valeria pressed a hand to her side where the vampire's claws had torn through her dress. Her skin was already stitching itself back together, but the blood remained, dark and gleaming against her pale flesh. She caught him looking and smirked. "Like what you see." His answering growl was more rumble than sound, always. Beyond the ruins, the forest whispered with movement. Their enemies have fled, but not far, not for long. Valeria's fingers curled into his fur, her grip possessive. "They'll come back," she murmured, "with more teeth, more blades." Kieran bared his fangs. "Let them." She laughed, the sound like shattering glass. Then her smile faded, her silver eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "We can't keep running." He knew what she meant. This, whatever they were now, was too big for shadows and stolen moments. The eclipse had marked them, changed them. It was time to claim their place. The Crimson Court. They found the fortress in the Deadlands, where the earth was cracked and the rivers ran black. It rose from the mist like the bones of some ancient beast, its towers jagged against the bleeding sky. Valeria's breath caught. "The old Vampire King's seat," she whispered, "abandoned for centuries." Kieran's claws flexed. The place reeked of death, of old power. But beneath the decay, he sensed something else, something waiting. "It's ours now," he said. Valeria's eyes gleamed. Together, they crossed the threshold. The halls were empty, the air thick with dust and the echoes of forgotten screams. But as they walked, the shadows seemed to stir, whispering secrets in a language neither could quite understand. At the heart of the fortress stood a throne room, its ceiling open to the sky. The eclipse painted the cracked marble floor in shades of rust and gold. Valeria stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the stone. "Kneel," she said suddenly. Kieran's ears flattened. "What?" She turned to him, her dress rippling in the unnatural wind. "Kneel," she repeated, softer this time. "Let me crown you." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then slowly, he sank to one knee before her. Valeria's fingers traced the curve of his muzzle down to his throat, where her venom still pulsed beneath his skin. "My wolf," she murmured. Then she reached up and snapped one of the fangs from her own necklace, a blood-red jewel that had hung between her collarbones. When she pressed it to his forehead, it burned like a brand. "Rise," she commanded, "King of the Eclipse." As Kieran stood, the fortress itself seemed to shudder awake around them. The shadows deepened. The air grew colder. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not in challenge, but in allegiance. The reckoning. Their enemies came at dusk. Vampires in their silks and silver, werewolves in their battle-worn pelts. They flooded the Deadlands like a tide, their weapons glinting in the dying light. Kieran and Valeria waited for them on the fortress steps, their bodies wreathed in shadow. The answer was a volley of arrows, a chorus of snarls. Valeria sighed. Pity. Then the battle began in earnest. Kieran moved like a storm-given flesh, his claws tearing through armor and bone alike. Valeria danced between the blades, her laughter a deadly melody as she drained soldier after soldier, their bodies crumbling to dust in her wake. But the true horror came when they fought together. Where Kieran's claws struck, Valeria's shadows followed, twisting wounds into gaping maws. When Valeria's fangs sank deep, Kieran's roar shook the earth, sending enemies to their knees with hands clamped over bleeding ears. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The coronation. When the last enemy fell, the eclipse reached its zenith, painting the world in perfect, endless crimson. Kieran and Valeria stood amidst the carnage, their bodies slick with blood not their own. Slowly, they turned to each other. Valeria reached for him first, her fingers tangling in his fur. "Mine," she breathed. Kieran's answer was to pull her close, his muzzle pressing against the mark he'd left on her throat days before. "Yours," he agreed. Together, they ascended the steps to their throne, a monstrous thing carved from obsidian and bone. When they sat, the shadows themselves seemed to bow. In the silence that followed, a new sound began, first one, then a dozen, then 100. Howls, screams. The cries of every creature in the Deadlands, pledging fealty. Valeria leaned her head against Kieran's shoulder, her smile a promise. "Listen," she murmured. "They're singing for us." And as the blood moon watched, the night itself trembled. For the old gods were dead, and the new ones had just begun their reign. The fortress stood silent under the eternal eclipse, its jagged towers clawing at the crimson sky. The air hummed with power, thick with the scent of iron and frost. The Deadlands stretched beyond the walls, a graveyard of the fallen, their bones now part of the earth that would remember their defeat forever. At the heart of the obsidian throne room, Kieran lounged like a king carved from shadow, his massive form draped in pelts of conquered beasts. His golden eyes burned low, like embers in the dark, watching as Valeria paced before the arched windows, her silhouette painted in blood-red light. She was restless tonight. He could feel it in the way her fingers flexed, in the sharpness of her gaze as it cut through the gloom. "What troubles you, my queen?" His voice was a rumble, deep enough to shake the stones beneath them. She paused, her back to him, the silver threads of her gown shimmering like trapped starlight. "Do you ever wonder," she murmured, "if this is enough?" The question hung between them, dangerous. Kieran rose from the throne, his movements slow, deliberate. He crossed the room until he stood behind her, close enough that his breath stirred the loose strands of her hair. "You want more." It wasn't a question. Valeria turned, her lips curling into something too sharp to be a smile. "I want everything." He knew that hunger. It lived in him too. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the whispers of the lands beyond, the cities of men, the hidden covens of vampires, the wild packs of wolves who had yet to bow. Kieran's claws flexed. "Then we take it." The march of monsters. They rode out at midnight, when the eclipse was at its peak. Kieran led the way, his transformed shape cutting through the darkness like a blade. Behind him, Valeria moved like a ghost. Her presence felt more than seen. Their army followed, a legion of creatures who had pledged themselves to the Blood Moon sovereigns. Werewolves with eyes like dying stars. Vampires with skin like cracked porcelain. Things that had no name, only hunger. The first village fell before dawn. It was a small thing, nestled in the valley like a forgotten secret. The humans had barred their doors, hung charms above their windows. It didn't matter. Nothing could keep them out. Kieran tore through the gates, his roar shaking the earth. Valeria slipped into homes like smoke, her laughter the last thing the dying heard. When the sun should have risen, the eclipse remained, staining the world in endless red. By the time they finished, the village was silent. Valeria stood amidst the wreckage, her fingers trailing through the blood pooling at her feet. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. Kieran came to stand beside her, his muzzle stained dark. "Where next?" She looked up, her silver eyes reflecting the bleeding sky. Everywhere, the dream of empires. Weeks passed, then months. Their reign spread like a plague, unstoppable, inexorable. Castles crumbled before them, forests burned. The earth itself seemed to shudder beneath their footsteps. Yet, in the quiet moments between conquests, they found each other. In the depths of their fortress, in a chamber where the walls were lined with the skulls of their enemies, Kieran pressed Valeria into the furs, his teeth grazing the mark he left on her throat. She arched against him, her nails scoring down his back. Drawing blood, she licked from her fingertips with a sigh. "Do you think they'll ever stop fearing us?" she asked, her voice hushed. Kieran growled, low and possessive. "I hope not." She laughed, the sound like breaking glass, and pulled him closer. The end and the beginning. Years later, when the world had learned to tremble at their names, they stood together on the highest tower of their fortress, watching the eclipse that never faded. Valeria leaned into Kieran's side, her head resting against his shoulder. "We've done it," she murmured. "Everything is ours." He nuzzled into her hair, his breath warm against her skin. "Not everything." She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, her brow furrowing. "What's left?" Kieran's smile was all fangs. Eternity. And as the blood moon watched, its light painting them in shades of ruby and shadow, the vampire queen and the wolf king kissed, their love a dark and endless thing. The world would never be the same. And they were just getting started.